First of all, I'd like to start off by thanking Charlotte and Tim for, well, firstly inviting me, but for also creating this amazing conference. I think they should be very, very proud of what they're doing. I found yesterday hugely inspiring, and it reminded me that we can never stop learning in this thing that we do. And I took a lot of comfort as well listening to what certain people were saying. I think we all suffer from a lot of insecurities as photographers, and things that I heard yesterday made me feel sort of better about myself, things I was worried about, and so on. So I got a lot from yesterday. I'm sure you all did too, and I'm very much looking forward to more of it today. So I'm going to talk about my commercial work. I'm going to show you a few shoots that I've done, things that we do behind the scenes, how we go about things. And I'm going to talk about the impact that my commercial sort of career has had on me and how that led to me doing a lot of personal landscape work. I started off in the 80s. I went to art college. I lasted about 3 months, much to my father's horror. Part of the course was photography, and I loved that very much. I loved the whole thing about operating a camera. I loved the whole thing of developing and printing, and the fact that you could take a picture and then put your own stamp on it later on in the darkroom. And as I started to research all this stuff, I got into the work of people like Bob Carlos Clark, John Claridge. John Claridge did a lot of in-camera and darkroom work with filters, cross-processing, that sort of thing. So I took a lot of inspiration from that, and I think some of that still shows in my work. So yeah, let's have a look at the some commissioned work. Oh, I don't think this is on. Right, so the commissioned work. Well, yesterday's talk by Mark finished with a dog, so I got up early this morning, 4 o'clock for some reason, and changed the order of my slides because I wasn't going to be outdone by him. So this is a shoot that I did for Skoda. So we're given a bunch of normally hand-sketched visuals, and this particular one was pretty much, as you see here, there was a car by a lake, there was a dog shaking itself dry, and they say you should never work with animals and children, but I was determined to give this a go. So of course I said to the agency, yeah, it'll be no problem. So what we ended up doing, we ended up hiring a dog with a handler, and this dog is trained to, if it's got a toy in its mouth, it won't shake. I don't think it's a gun dog, but I think it retrieved things from shoots and so on. But the whole point is when it had this little teddy bear in its mouth, it wouldn't shake. So what the handler would do, put the teddy bear in its mouth, and then we'd get a bucket of stinky old cold water from the lake, pour it on the dog, and it would just sit, it would stand there. And she'd whip the toy out, and then it would shake, and that's when we'd get our 2 or 3 frames. And we did that about 10 times. And that's one of the frames, and I think we comped in probably the eyes from another one just to get a slightly sharper ping on the eyes. But it seemed very happy. So this is another shot from the same campaign. Now it looks very simple. Clearly that's a manicured allotment. But this gives you an idea of actually what's going on. So we've got a bunch of people there. It's quite busy. You've got the client, you've got the person looking after the client, you've got the guy that did the allotment, you've got the art director, you've got a junior creative, there'll be my assistant, the models, and someone else. So it's quite a busy scene. It can be quite stressful, there's a lot going on. It's very much a sort of a team effort making these pictures. They're huddled around the monitor there. We often, for this sort of thing, will shoot tethered. So the art director gets a very clear view of exactly what we're shooting. So this is another commission, and this was all about some sort of nasal decongestant thing made out of salt water. So someone came up with the idea of having running noses. And so we had these, instead of doing it in CGI or having it part illustrated, we actually got these things made. They're quite big, and 2 people inside them, obviously. They couldn't see out, so they had walkie-talkies strapped to them so we could give them directions, and they literally held hands and just run up and down the beach. And we did this for 2 days. And the brief was to, well, they wanted a lot of drama, they wanted it to be very dramatic. And we were fortunate in that when we were down there, the weather was just right. I think we probably comped in a few wave splashes on the right, but other than that, it's pretty much how it was. Just to prove that I'm not telling lies, that was on one of the sunnier days. So this is not a landscape shot, but it's just it's quite an interesting thing that we do when we shoot cars, and it's, how can I describe it? This feeling of movement it obviously makes the car look like it's going very fast, but the way we actually do it is we attach the camera to the car, and it's a carbon arm. And we move the car very slowly, about 5 miles an hour. Sometimes there's somebody behind it pushing. I think there is, on this instant, there'll be someone low down pushing the car. Sometimes we tow it with a rope. So there's the carbon arm. And there's a big plate under the car that's bolted. And then the arm has like a knuckle, and you can move it in any direction. And you can extend the arm out and out and out, depending on how you want to shoot, which lens you're shooting with, and so on. But that's exactly the setup that we used for that previous shot. Here's another one. I think this was being towed on a rope, this one. And again, so we set the shot up statically. That's the art director there. And we move the car quite slowly over a long exposure. So it could be 10 seconds. And we'll use 10 stops of ND, something like that, to get that effect. So I like showing this to people. Before Lee came up with this system of putting collars on lenses and then putting the holder on so you could get the filter really close to the front element, what we had to do was get matte boxes actually made. A friend of mine, Darren Rees, had a matte box made that was beautiful, and he gave me the phone number of the engineer, and he made me one too. So the only thing that this guy didn't make is the polarizer, is the piece of glass. And because of the size of the lenses, we used cine filters, Tiffin filters, big glass filters, and that's how that system worked. The whole thing is completely engineered by hand. But incidentally, now I use an Alpa camera, which is a much smaller camera. This system's way too heavy, so I've gone back to using Lee. Their holder's nice and light. That's another example of a rig shot, but this is done with software. So the the landscape was shot in Scotland, that's Glen Etive, and the car was shot in Bedfordshire at Millbrook Proving Ground. And then there's a piece of software that replicates that effect of the rig boom arm, including jitter and bounce, which is an effect that happens when you're on an uneven road. So this is a commission from Corbis. It's rather lovely, being commissioned to shoot landscapes. When you're shooting something like this for stock, you have to get permits so that the client knows that he's got permission to use the shot, and you're not going to get some private landowner saying, you were on my land and you weren't meant to be there and so on, and somebody gets sued. So everything has to be very carefully done in a paper trail. So we hired this location for a day, and we had to pick our day as well, so you can't just turn up randomly. So using various software, we sort of had a rough idea when a good day would be. I didn't want it to be too sunny. So we just turned up, we had our permit. but we're actually treated to a really beautiful sunrise, and there was some mist as well. So it's just a fortunate thing, really. This is a stitched file, so they're 3 frames stitched together. That's another one from the same day. This is another image for Corbis. Because it's commercial, we comp the sky, and I don't feel bad about doing that. I don't do that with my personal stuff, but because it's a commercial image and has to sell, a lot of clients love a fluffy blue sky. And so that sky was shot somewhere else and we just dropped it in. But again, another happy accident, really. I was staying in the Bridge of Orkney, and overnight there was a foot of snow or something like that, and just woke up to this amazing scenery. So this series of pictures came about because I was asked to do a shoot for a well-known outdoor clothing brand, and what they wanted was examples of people comped into backgrounds or into landscapes. So what they wanted me to shoot the clothing in the studio, and then they wanted to marry them up with background images. So we didn't have to take the models out on location, spend days and days and days, all the cost involved in doing that. So it'd be a question of sending me out on my own or with my assistant, and then we'd shoot the models reasonably quickly in a studio with all the control that you have over creases and making everything look nice. So I didn't have anything like this in my book. So one of my agents said, well, you need to shoot it, a series, put them in the book so we can show examples. So this is what this is about. So the background is it's the Isle of Harris. So I chose 6 backgrounds. We showed them to the stylist, and she chose the costumes, the wardrobe. So you can see we've matched his blue shirt to the boat, the colour in his waterproof dungaree things is sort of picked out from the foreground. So we shot him in a studio in London. And we got actors. We didn't actually get models, we got actors because we wanted them to feel like real people. And often models have sort of 3 expressions, and it can all feel a bit wooden, whereas an actor gets into the part. It makes a big difference. This is another one. It's the Isle of Harris again. You can see how we've sort of married the colours together from the sand and the sky and so on. We had a very small wind machine blowing her hair as well, just to give a feeling of, well, wind and movement. And over time it made her eyes water. So I don't know if you can see it, but there's a tear running down her face, which sort of added to the melancholy. But it was a complete mistake, really. It wasn't meant to be there. Here's another one. This was the first one we shot, actually, and this is Harris again. And she was the first person to turn up at the studio. And we found out this is shot along the Golden Road. I don't know if anyone knows that, but it's this amazing winding road that goes through Harris. And I think it's the Golden Road. It's just off it. And we found out that her parents live on that road, which was a lovely coincidence. And this is me just having a bit of fun, really, because I didn't win the commission for the outdoor clothing people. I just thought I'd make this guy look as miserable as possible. It was my Patagonia jacket, and it wasn't the people who were seeking to commission, so I just had a bit of fun with it. This is the Isle of Skye. So the whole thing about comping people into backgrounds, once I had these images in my book, and I could show people, that we could do it reasonably convincingly. I mean, they're quite sort of illustrative, but we could do it well. Every single hair on his head you can read. It's quite an achievement, really. I do nearly all my own post-production, but I get a guy to do my cutouts because it really is it's a great skill, and I don't have the patience for it. But I do all the grading and dodging and burning, colour grading and so on my work. So because we demonstrated we could do this, I won a job for Science in Sport, SIS, the people that do the power drink, the energy drink. So we got to shoot Chris Hoy, which was a fantastic experience. We had him for 4 hours in a studio in Manchester. And then what we did, we matched all the focal lengths, camera heights, distances, and so on. And then I had half an hour in the velodrome in Glasgow to shoot the backgrounds. I think 6 backgrounds. It was incredibly stressful. And I was allowed in between the cleaners opening up and the first guys doing their practice runs, which was half an hour. And for some reason, the cleaners were playing some mad death metal music, extremely loud over the tannoy, so I'm stressed anyway. Plus this on top, it was like a torture, and I was dripping with sweat when I left there. But we got what we needed. Another example. We added the movement on the wheels and the background in software as well. So it was all shot static. I realise it's not landscape photography, but it's just showing you some of the tricks that we get up to, really, and what we can do. This was shot for BAA, the airport people that own Heathrow, I think. And again, because of the security and the fact we had to be accompanied everywhere, we had a specific day or morning that we could go and shoot this. And it just so happened it was an incredibly, well, it was an amazing morning. It's snowing in the background there, but we just carried on shooting and we managed to get some really strong images. That Boeing is actually moving towards us. And I've got the guy, the guys that drive around in the yellow Jeeps, yellow Land Rovers rather. I've got him holding my collar, literally, and I said to him, at the last minute, just pull me up so we could just keep shooting. We're in radio contact with the pilot, and that's shot with a really wide lens, so the plane's actually quite close. So that was exciting. Same day, you can see the weather's just doing amazing things. As I'll mention probably time and time again, I'm a big fan of going out in bad weather and the surprises that it can bring. I mean, it could have rained or snowed all day and we could have got nothing, but it was worth persevering. This was part of a shoot I did for the London Philharmonic Orchestra. So we had to shoot key London cityscapes. They had to be large files because they were going to be big users, billboards and so on. So these are stitched. The sunset is completely fake. But I think that, the time on the clock is about right. This is another one from the same series. And on this one, we dropped the sky in as well, because it was a clear sky. So we just added that in too. This is how one of them was used. So again, by showing, that I could shoot people separately. And we just try to match some of the lights in the background. We just try to sort of replicate that on her skin. Some warmth coming in there. I mean, clearly she's not standing on the muddy bank of the Thames, but once you've got all the copy and logos and so on, it sits together quite nicely. This was a lovely job. This was one of the first jobs where I was, how I'd describe out in the landscape shooting stuff. It felt very personal. So it was a commission from Mercedes, and it was all to do with a head-up display that warned you of things that were coming, things that might be around the corner or weather conditions and so on. And so what we did, we found a load of beautiful locations that sort of told the story, and then we got a model maker to make these signs for us. And he's a brilliant guy. He took into account that we were shooting underneath these trees, so you can see he put sort of water damage and moss and stuff on the sign itself. It's utterly convincing what he did. It's incredible. So I've got all these signs back at home in a garage. We had a pole and a base and about, I can't remember, 6 or 7 signs, all demonstrating these different things. Here's another one. This was a surprise shot. This was actually the bridge at the back of the hotel, so we hadn't seen this location. But when we arrived and checked in, we spotted it. And the nice thing about working with a flexible art director is he might let you, throw your own ideas in. And so we shot on that bridge. You can probably gather the bridge itself is probably only about that much stone above the road. So my assistant is lying on his back, holding that sign, because the stand would have been too much of an angle. So he's lying on his back holding this thing. It's just another example of another one of the locations. Not quite sure why there's roadworks at a beach, but another one of those. This is all Dartmoor. So more of this comping thing, although this is a reasonably straight shot, the sky was as it was. This was shot for Mercedes, and this guy was a model, because they wanted a sort of an iconic look. So this is a mixture of flash and ambient light to get the sort of semi-frozen look on the flag. And typical Mercedes sort of grading, they like things really punchy, quite monochromatic, it's quite a German feel. If you look at a lot of their ads, they're very stylised. It's another one for them. Now the people in the van were shot in completely different places, and the background is completely separate. So I had about an hour at Rockingham racetrack to shoot the backgrounds. And then we shot the people at one of Mercedes' properties on a stretch of road, and we just measured the distances and so on. And we got someone very good at masking to cut them out, drop them on the background, and then I did the colour grading. Another example of that. So we shot from a cherry picker looking straight down onto tarmac, measured the distance with a disto meter. We had to shoot it twice because we only had 6 people, so we had to duplicate them. And then at Rockingham we went to the same height and shot the track there, and we dropped the Mercedes logo on as well, so that's put on afterwards. And the guys that we're shooting, they all worked in the office, so they're not sort of mechanics or Formula One, chaps. So we had to really egg them on and give them a bit of sort of verbal abuse, really, to get them into the team spirit. So it was a good fun day. Lots of shouting and laughing. Here's another version of this sort of looking down approach. The van and the people were shot in one location, and then the background in another. So this was a commission from Land Rover, a real dream for me. A, because it was the Faroe Islands, where I've always, I've loved the idea of going there. B, because it's Land Rover. I'm a big fan of Land Rovers, and the fact they wanted to do a really moody sort of approach to this. They wanted, they sort of asked for bad weather and just drama, really, and that's exactly what we got when we arrived. So we spent about a day driving around certain locations, all of which we found on Google, because it's slowly becoming more popular. We got a taxi driver to drive us around all these different locations. We took shots on our phone, me and the art director, and then we sat down in the evening, went through them all and made our list of where we were going to go. And we drew it up, and that was our plan. And basically we were prepared for bad weather. We had some lighting with us because we had to do some portraits. We jumped in the vehicles and off we went. You'll see there's a little bit of movement in the foreground. It's probably quite hard to see on the screen, but the wheels are also moving slightly. This was all added later on in software. I would say don't tell anyone, but it's being streamed, isn't it? So this is another one. Lovely stretch of road that had been laid recently, so it made for a lovely sort of little plateau for the car to sit on. Not a lot to say, really. I mean, it's a stunning location. It really is. So part of the project was to also shoot portraits along the way. The story was there's a restaurant there, a very well-known restaurant, and it was all about the journey around the islands, picking up the specialist and local food that go together in their amazing menu. And this lady is a marine biologist and a seaweed specialist, and that's her brother. Now they look wet because, well, he looks wet because you'd think he might have just come straight out of the sea, but it was pouring with rain, and but we were ready for that. All the lighting was covered in plastic sheet. We just used a single softbox up high. It was very windy, so my assistant was holding on to it, and it was technically quite a simple shot to do, really, and we just waited for various waves to break and bits and pieces like that. I think with shooting in bad weather, as long as you're prepared for it and not too fazed by it, you can do an awful lot. As long as the rain is not coming into the lens, you really can do an awful lot. Here's another one. So with the car, we were, instead of lighting it, because we didn't really have time and the weather was bad, what we did was various exposures for different parts of the car. So for the tyres, for various panels, for the headlights, for the glass, and then you pick various parts and overlay and brush in. So you end up with a sort of a car that feels lit. This was the very last location and the weather just broke. So this was a shoot for Siemens. Now, probably these days we'd shoot her in the studio, but we took her up. This is in North Wales, and I'm sure some of you recognise the location. We actually took her up there with all her clothes and props and bits and bobs in rucksacks, and we walked up, got her dressed behind a rock, of which there are plenty, and she stood there and we shot it for real. The Sky was shot in Brighton. And another location that I'm sure a few of you might recognise from North Wales. This guy on and off stood in that lake for 10 hours, and this was probably the last roll of film that we shot. So we were shooting all day as the sun moved round. He's a fitness instructor, he's not a model. You'd never get a model to stand in a lake for 10 hours. So when you have a certain type of shot in your portfolio, it often gives clients confidence to then perhaps commission you in a similar style. A lot of clients like to see a shot that's almost the same as what they're after, which can be really frustrating. But this sort of picture would have possibly led on to something like this. Now, this is a PDF that a client would have sent through. It's a visual. So someone created this, dropped all the copy on. That's what would be sent through to us, and then we have to give them a price for doing this shot. And the process will involve getting a producer, a location scout, a model. There's probably a little minivan full of bits and bobs, all the equipment, lighting. It can be a very, it can be a large group of people following you around. A grip truck. What else would we have? A location manager, and so on. So this is the visual. We ended up winning this job. This is a shot we ended up with. Now, she isn't a model, but she is a paddle boarder, and we had to get the board secured in the lake because we couldn't risk her falling in, after the first frame or whatever. So this is all done with scaffolding and sandbags, and I'm down with waders on with the camera on a tripod. And so it's very set up. We've got reflectors all over the place, and we literally just waited for the sun to drop down behind the hillside there. The shoot producer is the guy in the canoe, so he had a walkie-talkie, and we're going left a bit, right a bit, up a bit, down a bit. So everything is carefully placed. So the clouds weren't there, and the fog or mist wasn't there either, so that was added in post. And I think, one of the points to remember with all this is we're given a day to turn up to do this shot. So if the fog isn't there, it's part of the brief, you have to add it somehow. So it is cheating, but it's part of the creative process. Or it can be viewed as cheating, but it's not really. It's just part of getting the shot on the day. We're not given a week to think about it and then go out and shoot it. You have to turn up on Thursday and come back with the shot in the bag. Here's another one from the same brief. This was an art gallery that we stripped out. It was just a perfect location, and then we bought the beam and the mats and so on in, and it was lit with flash. We had some huge reflectors that we bounced the flash off just to keep it reasonably soft. So this is a commission for a company called Milliken that make mats. So if you ever walk into a bank or a large office, there's every chance you would have stepped on one of their large mats. And the whole point of this stuff is it collects dirt off your shoes. And it does it in a very clever way, apparently. And they were quite forward-thinking, and they had a campaign where they wanted to shoot beautiful landscapes, but with some sort of man-made element or some reference to the weave in their mats, that sort of thing, some sort of message. This is shot in Edale. The art director was great. We just basically packed the cameras in the bags and went for a walk for 4 days. We had a rough idea where we're going, and we just wandered around until we saw things that we liked the look of. So this is a sort of a man-made construction within a landscape. Where is that? That's near Brighton somewhere. That's the art director. We couldn't find a man-made element, so we had to pop one in there. This is near Edale as well. This is the last job I ever shot on film. Ooh. I think that's Shoreham. So again, man-made objects creating strong shapes in the landscape. I think this is Saltdean. What's quite lovely is we found these, I think is it clay, I'm not sure, but these lovely lines which could have been the weave in the mat, collecting these rocks and so on. So this was a lovely location to come across. We all got very sunburnt that day, I remember. This is my assistant wandering through some grasses. So again, we just found these grasses and felt it could have been the weave of the mat, but it didn't have this man-made element, so we just got him to slowly wander through. The sky was rather lovely. So it's just one of these happy chances, really. So that last job that I just showed you, it really sparked my interest in being outside, shooting landscapes. And that job was, I suppose, pivotal for me to make the decision to start shooting more personal landscape work. I've been running a studio since 1988. You know, we were doing okay. We employed quite a few people towards the end, but it was very stressful, and I wasn't shooting things for me anymore. I was just shooting anything just to keep the machine turning, to pay the bills and so on. And I was falling out of love with photography. So after shooting the mat job, I really, really, really enjoyed that and the whole process of doing it. And so I decided to start shooting landscape work for myself. So we'll get onto this. I'm just going to quickly talk about my approach to the landscape work, personal work. I like to think it's very simple. It's complete contrast to the commissioned work. You know, the mass of people, all the gear, the choice of lenses, lighting, you know, we have everything at our disposal. Whereas with this, I'd try and keep it to an absolute minimum. It was lovely yesterday hearing what John was saying, what Bruce was saying about having minimal equipment, and it made me feel like I'd made the right decision, because I'm someone that questions myself quite a lot, and I found it comforting that other people also use small amounts of gear. So I have a camera body and a digital back, medium format back. I generally shoot with one lens for everything. I do have 3. One of them is only ever used for commercial work. This is with my Alpa camera. So everything is shot on a 40, which I think is around a 28 or something. I have some grads, obviously a tripod. I have a geared head, which is really handy for minute adjustments with horizons. A Gore-Tex bag and an umbrella. So that's the camera. I mean, it's a thin piece of metal really that just holds the lens and the back together. The 40mm lens on there. I don't use that viewfinder anymore, so it's actually smaller than you see there now. What's lovely about this camera, and the one thing I miss going from shooting film to shooting digitally, is the simplicity of it. It's manual and mechanical. It has tilt and shift and stitch. So these lenses work best at around f8, I'm told. I normally shoot around 11, sometimes 11 2/3, but obviously you don't get a great amount of depth of field, so the tilt is a really lovely feature. And just, the tiniest bit of tilt can give you the depth of field that you need. And then the shift in the stitch is really lovely for producing panoramic images without moving the front element of the lens. So they stitch together very nicely and feel quite natural. The Gore-Tex bag that I always talk about. Now this, if I leave the hotel or wherever without this bag, I always say this, I have to go back and get it because it's my sort of comfort blanket. I can set up anywhere, put the bag over the gear and just hang around, and you don't have to sort of stand there with the umbrella worrying about it. It allows you a little bit of sort of peace to wander around. I made the mistake of buying one that was too small, so when I put my larger lens hood on it wouldn't fit. So I'd always recommend going for the Gore-Tex bag that fits your largest lens hood with your longest lens. Vented umbrella, really, really useful, and it's useful for stopping the wind buffeting the camera, obviously for protecting the camera from rain, and you can be quite clever with it and get it quite close to the front of the lens and so on, and as long as the rain's not coming straight in, generally you're still able to shoot. My friend Leo took this picture, which I really like because it proves that this is a straight shot from a Canon, I think, and it proved that when we were there, the weather really was going bonkers. And it was a case of going back to this location time and time again until we found something really special. Okay, so I use grads. When I first started shooting digitally, I didn't. I thought, well, this is cool, I can leave half my gear at home. But I quickly realised that it didn't feel right. It was a pain having to comp skies and foregrounds. It just didn't feel right, and it didn't feel like I was crafting the picture anymore. So I very quickly went back to using grads. I love using them. I occasionally use a polarizer when I'm perhaps in a forest or somewhere like that. And I occasionally use a lens shade. Got to be careful with the shade because if it's windy, it will vibrate and it affects the sharpness of the file. So I decided I wanted to go out and shoot personal landscapes. I didn't really know where to go. I spoke to my friend Darren Rees again. He was encouraging me to go to Scotland. Now, when I was a kid, I used to go to Scotland from the age of 5 or 6. My parents took me there camping every year. My uncle was a Scot, so we used to go and see him in Kilmarnock and then drive up to Loch Lomond and that sort of area. And then we would camp, much to my horror as a young kid. I didn't quite understand what was going on. We'd gone from a warm house to a sort of a canvas thing with lots of insects. It was all a bit strange. I got bitten once by a sheep tick. I won't talk about that. So I went to Scotland on the advice of my friend Darren, and in the back of my mind, I thought, I want to shoot these amazing vistas. Scotland's such a beautiful, dramatic place. This is what I'm going to capture. And I got there, and I was looking through the camera, and I just couldn't get it to work. So I went back to the Millikan map thing in my mind, thought, yeah, man-made objects in the landscape, this is what I've got to do. So this was shot in Sutherland, and so this was the beginning of something, but it didn't feel quite right, but I sort of pursued with it anyway. So this is a planted forest, and there was this nice central line, so I started playing with this sort of thing, but I'll be totally honest, I was pretty disappointed. I was talking to Bruce and I think Mark were talking about how photography often sets you up for disappointment, and learning to deal with that is quite important. And I remember on my third day phoning home and saying, I was asked, how's it going? And I was really not happy because I wanted these huge vistas, and I was sort of shooting this sort of thing, and it just wasn't what I imagined. I'm thinking I've driven 13 hours to take that picture. So there was huge expectation on myself, and it wasn't happening. It was very frustrating. So again, man-made bits in a landscape. Same location, different view. And again, now this is interesting. When I turned up here, I had a real feeling that I'd been here before. And it's Upper Loch Torridon, I think, is it pronounced Diabeg or something? and I felt like I'd been there before. It was a weird feeling. So I shot some stuff. I was quite pleased with this. I just love the mood of it. A few years later, well, about 8, 9 years later, when my father passed away, I was given all the photo albums, and in there was a picture not dissimilar to the previous one, and I realised we'd been here on holiday. Now, you can't get to this place. It's at the end of a road. You're not passing to get there. So it was a lovely feeling to realise I'd been here before, and I think I started to then, I don't know, perhaps have a little bit more of a connection with these places. This is in Sutherland. I was driving from one place to another. Didn't really know what I was after. And I could see this rain coming in, and I got quite excited. So I jumped out the car, set the camera up. I caught this image. I think there were about 2 frames. And quite a few months later, once I started working on it, I really, really liked what I was seeing. All of a sudden, I felt like there was a connection. I liked the drama of the weather. It didn't feel too obvious. So this was the beginning of something. Now as I started getting more into landscape, I started researching and looking into other things, and I found Joe's amazing book, First Light, and in there were all these incredible locations that I'd never even heard of. I'd never been to Skye. So I thought, I've got to go to Skye. I've got to go and have a look at this for real. Now, I turned up and the weather was incredibly, incredibly wet. And but I persevered. I happened to have my Gore-Tex bag with me. I crossed the little river that you have to do to get to this, and anyone that knows this location will know that's a lot of water there. And it was raining heavily, the water was building and building. It felt very, very dramatic. And with the clouds sort of wisping around the mountain and the rain coming in, I had a real moment of excitement. So in a way, this is the picture where the penny dropped for me about capturing, I suppose, Scotland. This was another moment. I was on Harris, the weather was bonkers, and I was in this spot, and the rain was driving through. You can see the clouds just passing through there. I was sort of wedged in between some rocks. What I love about this, when I was a kid, I used to do a lot of illustrating and painting and so on. One of my influences was Roger Dean. I don't know if any of you heard of the band Yes or Uriah Heep. Well, he did a lot of the album covers for Yes, and a lot of his work was water and rocks, sort of fantasy art, really, but very beautifully done, and I used to love it. And this little area here absolutely caught my attention. And this is a location I've been back to time and time again. For this simple reason, I started to get obsessed with these little areas of rocks and water. As a kid, if it rained heavily at night, I'd go out into the garden in the morning and there'd be puddles, and where my folks used to carefully cut the grass with an edge and the garden would dip down, there'd be little rivers of water, and I'd go and play in these rivers. I found it all very strange, and knowing that the water would then disappear. And when I started doing these landscape pictures, all of that came back to me. It was a really childlike emotion. This is the same spot on a slightly calmer day. So I think the movement in the water, there's a little bit in the clouds, really started to, it was a thing that I really started enjoying capturing. I tend to like shooting when the water's going back out, by the way. I think you can get some more interesting results that way. I think it's a similar spot. My memory's not great sometimes. That certainly is a similar spot. Very different day. Although the sea was pretty rough, you can see there's a lot of movement going on there. So I try and do everything's in one exposure, thanks to the using grads and so on. I try and keep it as clean as possible. I do use post-production a lot. I try to make things film-like, because I was sort of brought up on film. The work of John Claridge was always really contrasty. He used to shoot film, cross-process it, and then sometimes dupe it. So he'd dupe daylight film onto tungsten film, type B duping. And that had a certain effect on contrast and so on. So these little things have always stuck with me. Another thing I like to do is play with, what's it called? It's sharpening, but on quite a wide scale. Let me just find out, sorry. High pass. So I create high pass layers with masks, and so I'd only paint it in around the rocks, for example, and then things like the background and the mountains and certainly the clouds, there'd be no high pass. So the foreground of the image is always sharper than the back. Even if the back is sharp, I just try and create the effect that you're perhaps looking into a painting. That's that same location. There's the little Roger Dean moment that got me so excited. But for me, I like to press the shutter when I've got a goosebump moment, and this was one of those. It's anyone that's been to this place on Harsh or anywhere coastal like this will know it's very noisy, incredibly exciting, it's a bit scary, and I really love that. I love that feeling of being perhaps a bit scared. And if I get the goosebump moment, then I know I'm onto something, and then perhaps it's just a question of waiting for the waves to create a certain shape, the clouds to do something. I mean, it can all be over in 5 minutes, but it's being set up and ready and then just waiting for the moment. And having a simple setup, again, helps this process because I'm not worrying about, should I be on this lens, should I be on that lens? The 40mm lens, to me, gives a very natural perspective. Whilst it is a wide lens, to me, it feels like I'm standing there. Most of the stuff I shoot is shot from eye level. I sort of want it to feel like I'm standing there when I'm looking at them. Harris again. Usual collection of mad clouds. I don't think it's the same beach as well. I think the first time I went there, I was there for 5 days. I saw 3 people in 5 days. But that's the joys of going in winter. Luscombe Tyre. The sun's out, which is unusual. Seriously, I tend to shoot when there's no direct light. This is the original background plate from the shot of the redhead girl. What caught my eye here was the rain coming in. So I saw this happening, pulled over and set up in 5 minutes. Generally in the car I'll travel with the camera on the tripod. So it's just a case of putting the filter holder on. So you can react quite quickly. Glenative. It was raining heavily, which gave this lovely separation between the little island and the mountain behind. I mean, normally the scene's quite busy. You can see up there that there's quite a lot of rain going on. But again, with the umbrella, struggling through the rhododendrons. Anyone that knows this spot will know it's a bit of a squeeze to get there. These are all being cut down, by the way. I met the forester and she said they're all going to be chopped down because they're not local to the area. Glenative again. Lots of rain overnight, and I knew this location from a previous trip, and I could see that this waterfall here was in sort of full flow, and so I wandered down and set up. Glen Brittle. Thanks, Joe, wherever you are. Appreciate knowing where this is. I've been here so many times now. Again, this childhood thing about water and the whole thing with Roger Dean, it's a surreal location. And I go back quite often just to go and have a look. It was interesting, the talk yesterday by Thomas about cliches. You know, I've often worried about showing this sort of work. You know, I've got pictures of the beach ball at Elgol that I deliberately didn't put in here because I'm thinking, God, I don't want to be seen, you know, as someone copying someone else. But I think if you're inspired by a location, then you should visit it time and time again, as much as possible. And, you know, you'll always find some magic. It's waiting for that moment, really. I've also been here and found absolutely nothing. This is another trip. Blue sky. It's funny what Bruce said yesterday. I've got a similar problem with blue sky. And this cloud, when it burned away, just the whole sky was completely empty. So I had about, I don't know, half an hour in the morning to get this. Sky again. I think with this I probably use 2 grads, one from the top and one from the bottom, just to hold detail. Again, I like the idea of getting it in one exposure. And this was just a question of waiting around for a long time. And this location too, certain things work and certain things don't, depending on the height of the water. So the weather, the snow, the amount of rain or melt water or whatever, all these things come into play. Again, I've been here so many times, but every now and then it comes together. Same place, completely different time. This was the same blue sky day. What caught my eye were these little bubbles moving round and round. The whole thing about long exposures as well, the back, the ISO of the back is 32, native I think, and so in a way I'm forced into these long exposures, which I quite like because it sort of makes it feel a bit like 5.4 or 10.8 to me, because I'm a bit sentimental and I miss those days really. Elgol. This was a magic moment. This little bit of seaweed just appeared and disappeared in seconds, and I was just very lucky to catch it. Again, anyone that knows this location will know that the sea does not come from behind you, but the weather was so full on that day, it was coming in from behind me, and I was having to brace against the tripod. But it was worth it. It was very, very exciting just standing there. That was definitely a goosebump moment. Elgol again. Just ticks all the boxes for me. Rocks, water, and this wonderful view in the background. Okay, it's a popular location. I think they're called honeypot locations or something, but it really doesn't matter. I think if you can get under the skin of a place, you know, I feel very calm when I'm there. It feels familiar. There's something lovely about that. Half an hour later. Again, it pays to just hang around and take your time. And another. They're all shot from probably within 2 feet of each other, but just very, very different days. And again, because I enjoy shooting in soft light, it's sort of a busy scene like that. I mean, these rocks on a different day might be really visually too much, quite jarring perhaps. But in this soft light, really, it's more about the movement of the water, the detail in the sky. I leave a lot of space as well around my work. And I think that's partly to do with the commercial sort of upbringing. You're always asked to pull back, pull back, pull back, and to allow space for logos and copy and so on. So it's a sort of a natural thing to do. But again, I don't make them too composed because I just want to feel like I'm standing there. I don't want to feel like I've designed the landscape or the location. I just want to feel like I'm standing there. This is Egg. So I was here for 5 days on this beach. Absolutely amazing. Really, really special place. In the B&B where I was staying, I saw a book on the bookshelf, and it was Bruce's book, and I started reading it, and took great comfort in a few of the lines that he'd written in there about being disappointed, being at a location, making the effort to go somewhere but not perhaps getting what you want. And it was just lovely to read that. And I think that's what's lovely about this conference, hearing so many things that perhaps get rid of some of our fears and boost our confidence a little bit to go out and do things that perhaps you wouldn't normally do. That's the same location. Just lucky to catch some weird goings on, really. That's it. Thank you very much.
As you can tell, you caught me out.
I finished a minute early, which means I get a shot, doesn't it?
Oh, right, okay. No, only the lightning talks.
Oh, okay,
no.
okay.
There's no alcohol for the main speakers, sorry.
Okay.
There's time for a couple of
I
questions.
can keep this gin though, can't I?
Yeah, there's a little bit time for questions,
All right.
because Julian's finished early. If anybody has any questions for him. Hello? Yes, in the front, Sue?
Yes, I'm not a photographer. Would you then use these natural ones that you've done on your own for commercial purposes?
They certainly go in the portfolio.
Uh-huh.
And so, for example, the Land Rover work would have been won because of them. So, yeah, I didn't really get to talk about that bit. Slipped my mind, sorry. So, yeah, the landscape work always goes into the commercial portfolio, sort of slots in. And then, people can see that I'm comfortable in these locations or shooting in bad weather or whatever. And that's definitely gained me work. Yeah.
You mentioned having a nostalgia for film, and I'm wondering why in your personal work you don't go back to that.
I'll be totally honest, shooting film, it's really hard work. And lugging the gear. I mean, the one lovely thing about the Alpa and the digital back is how light it is. And I guess because I've got into a workflow with it as well. Sorry, I can't see who else.
Alex Nail.
The way post-production works for me now as well, when I did shoot film, I immediately scanned it, and it got into the workflow that way. So basically, I've got rid of the lab process, the driving to the lab, the scanning, the spotting. It's just made life a lot easier. And because I like the idea of making big prints, I'd probably have to lug round a 10.8, and I'm not able to do that.
No, you could go 5 foot by 4 foot with a 4.5 or a 5.4, yeah.
Oh, okay,
Right,
well,
yeah.
maybe I'll change my mind then.
Yeah.
But I've just got into using the small camera, really. Yeah, but I've still got all my film cameras, and apparently film's not dead. So they will definitely see an outing again. Absolutely. I'm just not sure when or how, really. I was really inspired by John's talk yesterday. So it could be that the camera comes out indoors.
Any other questions? No? Oh, yes. Bruce.
I was just wondered if you ever climb up the hills at all as a photographer, well, really a mountaineer who takes photos. One of my interests is always to get away from the road and not have the photograph, not so much the photograph, the view that other people automatically pick up.
Sure. I've done a little bit of, I've done a lot of hill walking. I've never really taken the cameras with me though. No particular reason. Those sorts of locations just appeal to me. It's a gut instinct. It's not I don't decide to do it for any other reason other than I like being there. And that's really key for me. I like standing there, whether I have the camera or not. They're places I'd choose to go to. But that's not to say I won't go up a hill.
I'm intrigued by your processing. The big prints upstairs are magnificent.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have an idea when you're shooting what you're looking for?
I try and get it pretty close in camera. So there is some vignetting, there's a bit of dodging and burning, but nothing serious. Like I say, I do the high pass, but again, it's not a hugely noticeable thing. One thing I do soften the files a little bit. It's like a bleeding of the shadows, And that's something that we used to do with film in the darkroom or shooting with a black net. We used to put a stocking over the back of the 5.4 camera lens so that the shadows bled. And so that's a look that I still hold on to, which you certainly would see in the prints upstairs. But there's nothing crazy going on. It's dodging and burning. It's exactly what you'd do in the darkroom, really. I try to keep it real. I'm not interested in seeing everything in the shadow. I think less is definitely more. So yeah, but post-processing is an important part, and I try and get it as close as possible in the camera using grads and exposure. But you know, the sort of conditions I shoot in, it's already sort of leaning that way anyway. So yeah.
Question from myself, which is, do you now go out and look for these terrible Scottish conditions for your photography?
Well, because I'm my own boss, what I will do, I'll use the weather app, and you can sort of get a rough idea within a couple of weeks what's going on. So I'll always look at the weather, and if it is turning, if it's looking lovely and sunny, I won't go. If it looks like it's turning, then that's when I'd go. If it looks like solid rain, the dark cloud with lots of raindrops, that's the one time I've had to come home, when it's just been impossible. And you lose that. When you lose the horizon, then you're doomed. So
I would disagree with that. But hey.
We'll do one more question.
Where's your gun?
Julian, just wanted to ask if you'd dropped all your commercial work then?
No, not at all, unfortunately.
I assume not, but...
No, the commercial work pays all the bills.
Yeah.
Yeah, the landscape work is purely for love, really, but it has played a huge part of the commercial portfolio now. And certainly art directors and art buyers love seeing personal work. They don't just want to see commission stuff, they want to sort of see what makes you tick. And the Land Rover job is a classic example of that. The guy was 110% comfortable coming with me out in hideous condition, pretty bad conditions. I've got studio photographer friends that would never venture out and stuff like that. And, with a little bit of confidence in a Gore-Tex bag and an umbrella.
Where do you get a Gore-Tex bag from?
Decent outdoor shop in the canoeing section. I get asked that question a lot. The one I use now is an RNLI one. The one in the picture is a Jack Wolfskin, but they don't make it anymore. It's a storm umbrella, so it's vented. Yeah, but some of those can be really big. Yeah, but essentially, I guess a golf umbrella is the same thing. Quite like having the RNLI on it though. If I get washed away.
Make it easier to find the body, yeah?
Exactly.
One more.
Hi, thanks very much for that. Quite interesting. But I just wondered, you didn't really touch on your iPhone project. What was the background behind that? I saw the photos in Southall last year.
Yeah.
Interesting.
My friend Jack Lowe's on Instagram, and he badgered me to join. He thought I'd enjoy it. I have a funny thing about social media, and he was just saying, come on, give it a go. And so I did join, and it was the very first time I started using the camera on the iPhone, and I started enjoying it. It's the first time I'd ever used a 35mm lens or equivalent, and I just got into it. And then I started pretending it was it is a real camera, but I started pretending it was a real camera, and was having just a bit of fun pretending it was perhaps a 5.4 camera. And then I started through Snapseed trying to emulate the post-production a little bit that I do. Obviously, Snapseed adds noise and all sorts of things, which you can control, but it just became something. And then Instagram picked up on it, Apple picked up on it, and then it became a book, which honestly was never the intention. And as I've always said, I'm the last person who would have expected using a phone to take pictures with. So yeah, that's how it happened.
Okay. Any more? No, I think we're done. Thank you very much indeed, Julian, again.
Pleasure.
And,
thanks for having me. Thank you.
We've got a 30-minute... Hi, back in the green room again. I'm joined now by Julian Calverley, who's just given us a very interesting talk about the relationship between his professional work and his passion for landscape. If we had Paul Wakefield, who came to give a talk a couple of years ago, and there seemed to be lots of similarities there. I was fascinated by the darkness of your personal work. I remember seeing a talk. There's a book called The Genius of Photography by, I forget his name, Badger is his surname. I don't know if you saw it. It's a series on BBC Two.
No.
And he came and gave a talk for the RPS about documentary photography since the Second World War. Very different kind of work from yours, but very miserable work it was, I thought. Yeah. And at the end of the talk, there was a Q&A session, and I said, so do you consider yourself to be an optimist or a pessimist? And I'm going to ask you the same question.
Absolutely an optimist.
Right, okay.
Yep.
Because I'm a pessimist and I make optimistic photographs.
Right, okay. No, I am an optimist. I think you have to be a commercial photographer. But I enjoy the mood and excitement of, I suppose, those places in those conditions. And as I mentioned in the talk, there's almost a childlike reaction that I have. And it's to these dark, sort of moody moments, really. And the bad weather was, for me, the key. It's when the penny dropped. Instead of trying to make bright, colourful vistas that I wasn't seeming able to do, something just clicked, really. I mean, I think I'm quite deep. I do like quite deep and dark music.
Right.
So there is that side. There's definitely that side to me. But I think as a person, I'm an optimist.
Right. Okay. You talked about confidence issues, shall we say, a few times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I found fascinating because you're a successful commercial photographer, and one would assume that there aren't any confidence issues.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the commercial work and in the commercial world, I'm very confident.
Right.
And I mean, you're often working with a team, but there's a lot of responsibility. Often a lot of money and things like that riding on the success of a shoot. You're given short amounts of time, and I almost thrive on that pressure.
Right.
I'm very comfortable turning up at a location, not really knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, I think I'm very confident. But when it comes to the personal landscape work, it feels like a completely different world.
Is the key there that it's personal?
Could be. I think also because there's a lot of people to look up to, or I feel like there's a lot of people to look up to, and I feel like there's a lot of respect that sort of needs to be gained. I'm not sure exactly what I mean by it, but yeah, all of a sudden, I guess I'm bearing myself.
Yeah.
There was talk yesterday about cliches, and I remember buying Joe's book and seeing some of your work and thinking, wow, these locations are mind-blowing, I must go and see this. And I remember the first time I saw the beach ball. It was just an incredible moment, just standing there and witnessing it after seeing Joe's picture. And I had to take a picture, and in fact every time I go back there I have to take a picture, but I feel strange about showing them to anyone.
Do you feel that Joe has some ownership? Or do you feel that you will be compared?
Possibly compared, but I feel like I don't think he did, but it feels like he discovered it. I know he didn't. I've seen older pictures of it.
I think he personally discovered it. I don't think he'd seen any reference. Having chatted to him. So, but there isn't really anywhere in the UK that probably hasn't been photographed.
No, indeed. I think it's wanting to be original, which is it's incredibly hard. It's hard to explain, really.
Right. Okay. I mean, I think that in my terms, I would say that any work that is really personal is there's going to be a huge element of doubt in it, because there are no fixed criteria. So for your commissioned work, you have an art director, you have a whole body of people supporting and cajoling you.
A very tight visual.
Yeah, to
Almost-
produce something.
Almost photographic that you're replicating.
Yeah. So that takes away some of the uncertainties.
It then becomes a task to
Yeah.
it does become a task to replicate.
Yeah, so it's about
You're
skill.
adding your own
so
thing.
so I would say that you probably feel that you have all the requisite skills photographically to do that, and you've done enough jobs where you have to do strange things.
Yeah.
One of the shots you were talking about on the paddleboard.
Yeah.
And sort of casually mentioned, oh yeah, well we put the mist in because there wasn't any mist there, and we put the paddleboard on a set of scaffolding with sandbags, and see that for most non-professionals, those sort of things are scary. The notion that you'd have to do that is a scary thing.
Yeah. Well, to me, the idea of her falling off the board's more scary.
Right.
So.
Yeah, because you won't have all the costumes and that
Well,
kind of
exactly.
stuff.
Well, it would be a disaster. So.
I think it was Alan in the audience asked the question, have you given up your commercial work, which I thought was very interesting, because that raises the notion that one can survive on making landscape photographs.
I'm not sure about that.
No, I don't think it's possible. But do you sell your images?
I sort in the back of my mind, I would love to be able to survive on print sales.
Right.
But I think you have to gain such a reputation. I don't know whether it's well, in the States, for example, photographers can have their own galleries. I think photography is perhaps regarded in a different way culturally. I think in the States you can probably survive.
Yeah, and Joe does reasonably well here, but not very many photographers.
But I guess Joe is, he's so well known. He's got a fantastic reputation.
Yeah.
Household name. No, I'd love to sell prints. Interestingly, I've started doing a bit of guiding, which I never imagined.
Right.
I did a workshop last year for Alpa.
Right.
Again, I never imagined doing that. I really enjoyed it, by the way. I really enjoyed teaching people, and at the end of it, I felt quite down when everyone went home. And I
post-tour blues. That's a familiar feeling.
Well, I absolutely didn't expect it. I thought, well, this is going to be okay. But when everyone went, I was shocked how down I was.
Yeah.
And a couple of the guys I've done a bit of guiding for since become good friends. Coming here, talking to Bruce Percy about sharing. It's opened my eyes up to a lot of things. As a commercial photographer, I think you're very insular and you don't want to share because you don't want to give away your tricks.
Yeah, you've got trade secrets you want to protect.
Yeah, and you think, oh my God, I can't tell everyone how I did that, and because everyone else will go out and do it. But I've found out, and also talking to Dan Rubin at the photography show, who he shares an awful lot.
Yeah.
And last night at dinner we were talking about mindfulness and giving and that sort of stuff. And I've come to realise that only good things can come from sharing.
Oh well, yeah. And for me personally, I think my photography really grew when I started leading workshops, because in order to do that, you have to be able to convey the thoughts. You have to, and you have to organise actually how you did stuff. So there's a whole load of technical issues that you almost start to do intuitively because you've done it for so long. But the compositional ideas are even more deeply embedded, and they're even more intuitive.
Yeah.
And only when you have to start picking that apart and say to people, well, have you thought working like this, or and think about the philosophy of it. Does it really kind of come to the surface and change your own practice, I think.
Absolutely. And when Tim asked me to do this talk, I mean, I was flattered, but I sort of panicked and thought, my God, what am I going to talk about? Because, the commercial work, there's lots going on, but the personal stuff, I really don't think about it. Taking minimal equipment with me, I really don't think about taking the picture, or at least I don't think I do.
Right.
But obviously there is a lot going on inside. And I was listening to Bruce talking, who put across so well in words his methods and thoughts. And I just thought, God, I don't feel like I'm not very good with words, is how I feel, which is why I love photography, because in a way, all the words are in the picture. All the drama and shouting and stuff I really want to do is sort of, it's in the picture. And having to describe it has been a bit of a challenge, really.
Right. Okay.
And I
So
know,
how
I know
long
that's
did
going to
it
develop as well. You know.
So I'm going to ask a cheeky question. How
Yeah.
long did it take you to get the presentation together? I haven't asked anybody else that, by the way.
No,
Julian.
sure, no, it's fine. I'm really happy to talk about this because it's a big thing for me. I think this is the 7th talk I've ever done.
Right.
I've done 3 in Apple stores. I did Harrogate. So I've had a few talks put together.
You did some with POLA's stand.
I did the Masters of Vision.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of getting stuff together. When I was asked to do that, Pete Bridgewood that runs it, I said to him, Pete, there's no way I'm going to talk. I said I won't be able to deal with that because I had I was terrified of talking.
Right.
And but I got my head around it, believe it or not, through a bit of mindfulness and understanding it was just me that was causing the problems. So it didn't take that long to put the talk together, probably a morning.
Right, okay. And you got all the material,
but
so
I
it's
wasn't
just ordering it.
Well, the first time I talked, it was quite scripted, but it felt like I was giving a speech as opposed to a talk. And then when my confidence grew, I sort of threw away the script and announced to the audience I'm going to go freestyle. Let's see what happens. And it was the most comfortable I've ever felt. I sort of did that today a bit, but I did forget a couple of things. The lady that asked the question about integration, I forgot to talk about that, which was key and a bit silly.
No, but it happens. I mean, I just get when I prepare a talk, I just get a series of images around the theme that I want to talk about, and I might put 2, 3 or 4 word prompts. Yeah. And all the rest of it just flows from the pictures.
That's what I'm going to do.
But I there is always things that I forget, or at least things that I put in some talks and don't put in others, and I think that's fine. Yeah.
It was an interesting experience today because I did feel intimidated. I'm amongst landscape royalty, really. Well, that's how I see it. When I was getting into landscape,
we're scary, aren't we?
Yeah, especially when you've got that Nerf gun. But it was, I suppose, I just felt, there's John Blakemore in the audience, there's Joe, Bruce, you're there. All people that, as I started getting into landscape photography, you're the guys that are sort of there. And I read a few of your reviews on certain books and thinking, my God, this guy's serious,
Well, but I'm not really, So
sure.
I think it's Joe and I sometimes get this with clients on workshops. They feel intimidated, but they shouldn't do, because our view is that anything that you encounter is something that Joe or I have been through.
Well, the minute you meet people,
Yeah.
I got asked to do a workshop with Joe, and it's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
When we had an hour-long phone call, it was afterwards. It was like, oh my God, what a lovely guy. And it's just in the mind.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed your talk, and I hope
you.
that you will continue to do more, because I think it was a very good talk, and it was very nice. It's always nice, I think, for people that. I'm not very keen on amateur professional dichotomy, but I think it's very nice for amateurs to look at how a pro works and to see how the two can influence each other. So thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
Julian.
My pleasure.